Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your time and your attention. And I would like to thank the Grassroots Initiative for this opportunity to talk about pastoralism more broadly and more specifically about the outcomes of our project that is called PASTRES, that will discuss the opportunities, the challenges, and the uncertainties that pastoralists are facing in different parts of the globe. So, as I said, the chance is there to talk about PASTRES and more broadly to talk about pastoralism and uncertainty, pastoralists and uncertainties. PASTRES is a project, is a program, is a research program that is funded by the European Research Council and that is implemented by the STEPS Center from the IDS, the University of Sussex Institute of Development Studies, together with the European University Institute, where I am currently employed as a research fellow. The aim of this project is to scan and to analyze somehow how pastoral livelihoods have been reshaping, have been changing through time, with a view to adapt to the different and evolving uncertainties that somehow characterize the regions where they live. PASTRES is a project that undertakes 6 different fieldwork activities through local PhD students in 6 different pastoral regions of the world, all over the world, basically, because it is Maghreb, Mashrek, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia and Central Asia, as well as Southern Europe. So the opportunity is there to scan, as I said, within a global perspective, what's going on in pastoral areas and how pastoral communities are adapting and coping in order to keep themselves alive and evolving through these uncertainties. In order to operate in this kind of global framework, we decided to reframe pastoralists according to 3 main domains: environmental related uncertainties, market related uncertainties, and policy related uncertainties. And these have been scanned and analyzed, as I said, through different regions of the world. Let me start with addressing the features and the challenges that pastoralists face in Central Asia, that is characterized by vast and very heterogeneous rangeland territories that have been importantly reshaped by deep and intense political moves and political changes through time. In the last decades, in the last century, there have been mostly the Soviet and the Chinese systems that have been deeply reshaping the territories and the resources that pastoralists have to play with and to live through. Basic examples are the state kind of encroachment into the policy system and the property regimes, together with the definition of market opportunities for pastoralists. As we know, there have been a state-led engineering in environmental terms, as well as in socioeconomic and market-related terms. Everything used to be in common, and local pastoralists had to put together their land, their livestock, and their labor in order to comply with the state-led directives under the Soviet as well as under the Chinese regimes. These have in time been changing because the Soviet regime has collapsed and the Chinese state is still there, though the property rights system and the political ideology has been changing quite consistently. To give you very clear examples, until the late 80s, Chinese pastoralists had to share and put together their livestock, labor, and land, whereas during the collectivism, land and livestock had been freed from those kind of constraints. And in recent time, important patterns of privatization as well as individualization have been taking place. So we've been passing through a totally common system to a private-led system. And this has been important for pastoral livelihoods because the resource management, the patterns of resource management have been changing quite consistently, and so have the opportunities and the capacities to link with other societal actors, including market operators. The market was previously decided and defined by state directives, whereas nowadays it's run by local operators and market-related dynamics. Current systems and opportunities for pastoralists are also provided by the new investments, especially in China and in the Chinese-controlled areas, such as the One Belt, One Road infrastructure development that has been providing pastoral areas with a huge amount of infrastructure and facilities that used not to be there before. In our case, we are working in the Tibetan areas, and the amount of investment has been quite consistent in those regions. Whereas in the post-Soviet areas, the things have been changing quite consistently, and the opportunities that pastoralists had before in terms of roaming around the complete regional rangeland framework, as well as market opportunities, is now constrained by national borders and country-related opportunities, including with conflicts in certain areas. When we go southern in the region, in South Asia, Southeast Asia, mostly Chinese and Pakistan rangelands, the dynamics are somehow similar in respect to the engagement and the encroachment of the state into local resource management. The green revolution is the keyword I would use to define how pastoral livelihoods has been changing in this region, because the encroachment led by the state and market-related dynamics has been quite consistent and important in reshaping the pastoral territories and the opportunities for local herders and grazers to use pastoral resources. On the one hand, this has created a number of competition and conflict with the encroaching farming communities. On the other hand, it has provided for opportunities as well for cooperation and synergies. What is clear is that the whole mobility system that characterizes local pastoralists has been reshaped quite consistently in order to take into account the constraints and opportunities provided by the encroaching farming and cropping systems. This has also somehow played a role in the market engagement of pastoralists, because whereas before the value of fibers and wool in particular was very important, nowadays it's mostly animal proteins that are requested in local and regional markets. The dairy boom, as well as the taboos that somehow characterize some communities in the area. I'm here specifically mentioning the Buddhist consumption patterns. These have altogether reshaped the economic frame, whereas within which pastoralists operate in the region. Overall, the Green Revolution has been reshaping the financial, political, and technical agenda, and also providing opportunities, technical opportunities to pastoral producers, which have been engaging to an extent into agro-pastoral farming opportunities as well. The agenda here has also been changing from one government to another, and pastoralists also had to play with and through the different ideologies and the different framework the different governments have been pursuing. I will now try to move to the other continents, and we'll start with Sub-Saharan Africa, which is also characterized by a huge, vast, and very heterogeneous rangeland ecology that is quite well diversified between the Sahel and the Horn of Africa, although with many aspects that remain in common. One of these is the huge variability in climatic terms, variability in local as well as regional terms, and in the short as well as in the longer runs. It means that the environmental instability and non-equilibrium system that somehow characterize the rangelands of Sub-Saharan Africa is still quite intense and somehow characterized to a very good extent the livelihood of local pastoralists. Drought events every 10 to 15 years, that used to be the case at least before, has been important in reshaping the opportunities and the capacities of pastoralists to evolve and to develop their own economy. As we can see from this chart, the variability still remains quite astonishing. Another important process that has been characterized Sub-Saharan African pastoral territories is the huge and fast growth in demographic terms that applies for both people as well as for livestock. In this chart, we can see how the cattle population and that of sheep and goat has been raising quite constantly and consistently in the last decades, together with, though to a different pace, that of the rural population. So it means that territories that are still characterized by a huge environmental instability, ecological instability in terms of climatic patterns, has been populated with high and fast increasingly amounts of people and livestock. The Sahel, different from the Horn, is characterized by a kind of regional complementarity between in ecological as well as socioeconomic terms, as we will be seeing, between the southern and the northern belts, that has inspired through time and given the opportunity to implement patterns of transhumance that have been quite important in providing for a regional integration framework in socioeconomic as well as agroecological terms. So the animals, the cattle, mostly cattle herds, move southern and northern according to the season, as well as according for ecological purposes and for the grazing opportunities, as well as in market-related terms, because the animals that are grazed and raised in the northern drier belt are brought to the market into the southern coastal cities and countries that are highly densely populated. This has given rise to a huge amount of opportunities in political as well as economic terms, providing opportunities to complement these different areas. The ethnic heterogeneity of the region is also quite relevant, and there are 4 to 5, 6 major pastoral groups that inhabit the whole region and are scattered very often amongst different countries, such as the Fulani or the Tuareg. When it comes to the environmental market and the policy-related uncertainties, we can see that this transhumance has provided opportunities for complementarities as well as for competition, because farming communities have been encroaching into pastoral ones in the last decades, and this has given rise to opportunities for synergies as well as for conflict. And the region is somewhere characterized today by degrees of political and economic conflict that are quite intense and intensifying. But the transhumance, but I would say that transhumance overall, as I said before, has also provided important opportunities for regional integration in trade as well as in political related terms. When we move to the eastern part of the Sub-Saharan Africa area, the Horn of Africa, here we find that the heterogeneity of the area is quite different, in the sense that there are the pastoral populations is quite much more fragmented and scattered. You have some few communities that are living cross-border and through transnational networks, such as the Maasai, the Nuer, and the Somali, and the Oromo, but there are very many pastoral populations which are limited in numerical terms and are just living in few limited parties of certain countries. So the pastoral landscape is much more diversified as well as heterogeneous, and this also provides opportunity for competition, synergies, and conflicts at times. Throughout the region, even here, we've been facing important process of market and trade-related integration, not only at regional, but even at international level. Livestock from Kenya and from Somalia have been exported throughout the world in recent years. And at the local level, market-related dynamics have been quite booming. These are some pictures of the evolving camel milk marketing in certain parts of dryland in drylands Africa in the Horn region. This has also given rise to opportunities for establishing regional networks at a much more sophisticated level, including the what is called the Somali ecosystem, that plays a critical role in managing somehow and providing opportunities for trade and international integration of the Horn of Africa pastoralist systems, because it provides for opportunity. It's a kind of trade hub that gives opportunity to export products to the Arabian Peninsula and other parts of the globe. And this is managed and governed by a number of pastoral assets, including, as I said, the regional networks and socio-political governance that is very often not recognized through formal state systems. As we know, Somalia is a stateless country since 1991, but nevertheless, pastoral communities are able to play and govern those dynamics with quite skillful and sophisticated systems. I will now try to move to the Maghreb and Mashrek, and we will then try to move to the Mediterranean setting. We will be discussing here the southern flanks, the Maghreb and the Mashrek, that is North Africa and the Middle East. And later on, we will be also discussing the Euro-Mediterranean, Southern Europe, Euro-Mediterranean region, which is the one I'm working more often in these recent times. The Maghreb and Mashrek is a region which is also quite critical for pastoral livelihoods, because many of the local communities, such as the Kurds, the Bedouin, and the Berbers, have been living since centuries, since millennia, from extensive livestock rearing. This is a region where the potential for farming and crop production is very, very limited. It's about 5 to 6% of irrigated farmland in each one of these countries as an average, and it's very costly because water is limited and is very often in deep down into the soil. So the political as well as the economic role of livestock, keeping and livestock products in this region is quite critical, also in political economic terms. The effect of making animal proteins available to local consumers is a quite critical stand in political terms for most of the countries of the region. This is the reason why, to a good extent, pastoral livelihoods and pastoral territories have been framed into degrees of dependency, where state policies have been playing a major role. Differently from what we have found in the Sahel and we will find in Southern Europe, here there is an overall harmonized and comprehensive regional approach to agriculture and livestock farming, but there is a kind of fragmented and conflictive, I would say, framework whereby different countries apply very similar policies, but they don't coordinate with each other, they don't harmonize, which also provides opportunities for cross-border trade, very often in illegal terms, because the terms of trade on the different countries might differ from a period to another or from a season to another. The exposure of climate change of the Maghreb and Mashrek is also quite consistent, because, as we know, the Mediterranean is one of the hotspots of climate change. And so this area that used to be quite dry suffer as well from increased degree of variability in the climatic system. Even here, drought events have been playing a major role, even in recent decades. And in the 70s, these have been the dramatic drought events in the whole region have somehow played an important role in the reshaping of the local political framework. As from the 70s, in fact, the countries of the region have understood, and as well as the international policy framework, that this country cannot sustain themselves in food production terms. And the degree of dependence on the international trade and regional cooperation has been growing in recent decades, but this is definitely the region of the world that is more and increasingly dependent on food imports. Not only food imports, but even imports of agricultural inputs, including for livestock. Even here, as we've seen for Sub-Saharan Africa, the amount of the consistency of the human as well as the livestock population has been growing quite consistently in the recent decades. As I said, this together with the high and increasing variability in climatic terms has posed some political problems that have been reshaping the local policy agenda quite consistently. This is to say that pastoralists in the Maghreb and the Mashrek are mostly conceived and treated in political terms as pure livestock producers, and as such they are somehow controlled in subsidy terms, assisted in technical terms, and controlled even in political terms through the access of their resources by the central states that, as I said, have a specific interest in maintaining livestock production under strict control and enabling the access of local population to animal proteins. In recent decades, the whole region has been characterized by important trends of immigration, whereby the rural areas and the countryside have been somehow depopulated because of the rural youth abandoning towards urban setting or other continents. When we move a little bit deeper into the market dynamics, what we can see in the area where we are working, that is the southern part of Tunisia, Tataouine and Duiret, is that there's been specifically in the local area, a decrease in the demand in the production of meat, parallel by an important increase in the production and the demand for milk. So this is to say that animal proteins are still an important part of the diet, though the patterns of consumption and of marketing are changing through time, and pastoralists have to adapt to these evolving uncertainties. Moving a little bit northward, we find Mediterranean Europe that spans from Portugal and Spain to Italy, to southern France, Italy, and Greece, that are characterized somehow by very similar patterns. In this region, that is much greener than the southern portion of the Mediterranean, the interaction and the interface with the farming system is quite intense, and as well as it is the consistency and the harmonization of a common and regional policy framework. Throughout Europe, not only in Southern Europe, pastoralists as well as farmers have to comply with the common agriculture policy. That is one of the major pillars of the European Union. Since the early 60s, it engages about 40% of its overall budget, and it provides a quite consistent policy framework for pastoralists as well as any form of agriculture production to comply with the European rules and subsidy schemes. It's called the European Welfare Scheme because it provides important financial subsidy and financial support to local producers in exchange for the externalities they have to bear with, as well as the inconsistencies of the market dimension. The common agriculture policy in its 60 years of life has been importantly reshaping the capacities of extensive livestock systems to play and to manage their own resources and to interface with the market related opportunities. It will be too complicated to go into the details of the different reforms because the common agriculture policy is being reformed every 7 years. But it is quite clear that in the long term, pastoralists have not been favored by the evolutions of the common agriculture policy framework compared to other farming producers. And this is basically indicated by the huge decrease of livestock, extensive livestock farms we've been facing in the southern part of Europe in the last decades. We've been losing about 50%, half of the existing extensive livestock farms in the last 2 decades. And the remaining ones, they have been forced somehow to increase the consistency of their herds and flocks in order to comply with demands from the policy setting. So now we have much less pastoral farms with much higher amounts of animals, almost double in certain areas. So this has given has somehow reshaped quite consistently the relationships between livestock and land and labor, because being a shepherd nowadays is very different from what it used to be about 30 years ago, and the shepherding work is much harder and much more complicated, much more complex. This is also somehow mirrored by the fact that it's increasingly difficult to find shepherding workforce, and the issue of generational renewal is one of the critical ones for pastoralism in Europe. So despite the huge financial support that is provided by the European Union, the pastoral system in Europe is quite critically under threat because of lack of generational renewal. What we see here is the way a pastoral farm has been reshaped in southern part of France. You have increasingly, I mean, somehow I won't go into details because of lack of time, but the idea is that from the 80s to 2010, the shape and the quality of the pastoral farm has been changing quite consistently, and we have much less smaller flocks and much more larger ones, because in order to keep up with production costs, apparently most pastoralists have to change and upscale the amount of their animals. As I said, this has been having quite important implications in terms of the quality and the working conditions of pastoralists, and with the increasingly difficulty in finding a workforce that is motivated and skilled to remain in the countryside and to remain shepherding. So what we've seen in recent decades is the huge increase of the immigrant workforce in pastoral areas, playing the role of shepherds. The point is that these do not integrate in the longer term, so they don't scale up into the entrepreneurial level, and this provides an important problem when it comes to the next generation of pastoral entrepreneurs that is, as I said, is decreasingly from one year to another in Europe. So despite, once more, the important policy support, pastoralism in Europe is suffering from important decrease in the number of practitioners. Let's see whether we can proceed further and go to some common elements that somehow characterize pastoralists all over the globe. We've seen that despite important agroecological and sociocultural diversities, there are common challenges that characterize most pastoral areas and pastoral communities. The encroachment in, the climate change is definitely one of the aspects that characterize pastoral regions. There are very often drylands that are somehow more impacted than others by variations in climatic patterns. Normally, pastoralists would have, because of the nature, would have the capacities to respond and to cope with these climatic vagaries, but the policy framework plays an increasingly role in reshaping and in limiting somehow their capacities. The policy in certain regions more, while in others less, but the policy framework is increasingly relevant in deciding how much farming and other forms of encroachment is taking place, is entering into pastoral areas and somehow reshaping their resource management. And very often it's also playing a major role in interfacing between pastoralists, their resources, and the opportunities provided by the market. So market integration and the related socioeconomic patterns are often mediated and interfaced by the policy framework, whereby local, national, and regional entities and institutions play an important role. More broadly, in the policy framework, we've seen that there have been processes of regionalization on the one hand, whereas some countries have been operating through more transnational, through a more transnational framework, such as in the Sahel as well as in the European Union, whereas elsewhere this has not been the case, such as in the Maghreb and the Mashrek, as well as in the Horn of Africa. And there have also been patterns of power decentralization that have somehow characterized pastoral areas throughout the world, though to a different extent. And this has provided opportunity for pastoralists to play somehow their capacity to maneuver within the local policy framework to different extent. Market integration more broadly has provided opportunities in terms of exporting products throughout the globe. We have the pecorino romano being traded to US. 80% of pecorino romano is traded to the US every single year. And we have Horn of Africa meat produced by local pastoralists sold and traded into the Arabian Peninsula. And we've been seeing the transhumance and the way it plays a role in integrating pastoralists into the coastal markets in the Sahelian countries, as much as we've seen how much dairy and meat products have been playing a role. The demand for dairy and meat products have been playing a role in integrating pastoralists as well in the more broad national economies in China and in India. On the other hand, international trade and global marketing has provided challenges to pastoralists in terms of having to compete with products that could come from other countries such as New Zealand or Australia, where the conditions of production and the costs of production and transport are completely different, and therefore somehow provide wrong incentives to pastoralists. These are, as we can imagine, very broad and general talks about an overall understanding of the way pastoral livelihoods have been reshaping and changing throughout the world. But, well, every single area is characterized by specific local trends and patterns, as we can imagine. But in more broad terms, we can see that environmental uncertainties are increasingly play a role in pastoral areas, and often because the operational perimeter that pastoralists can operate within is increasingly shaped by market as well as state-led dynamics and patterns. The uncertainties characterized that somehow characterize the market integration of pastoralists have also been reshaping, and has been quite critical in reconfiguring the relationship between livestock, land, and labor in the different countries and in different regions, and provided also room for social stratification, internal competition, and dependency on market dynamics, as we've seen. And the policy framework has also been provided opportunities and constraints for pastoralists in terms of reshaping somehow the way they can access and manage their own resources, and the way they can access and manage the resources with other communities, with other countries, and with other opportunities existing in the globe. I don't have the capacity and the time to go through this in detail, but in the PASTRES website, you can find specific analysis about the ways that pastoralists in the different regions of the world has been using the different strategies, the different practices, and the different principles they've been applying in order to tackle and cope with these growing and diversifying uncertainties, You have three main works that talk about these evolving interfaces between pastoralism and uncertainties. Some are from a regional perspective, so talking about the different areas and the different patterns, and some others they hinge on the principles and the practices that characterize pastoralists all over the globe, and look at how these have been reshaped and reconfigured in the different regional settings, in the different geographical regional settings. This is the table of content of one of these works, but as time is limited, I would invite you to use the www.pastres.org website in order to look into further training opportunities, as well as technical documentation that could inform you in much better depth and detail. I thank you for your attention, and I'm open to any kind of question and suggestion. My email is down here. And as I said, I thank you again and a lot for your time and your attention.